You enter the marble lobby with a folder of forecasts, smiling like a host, while the building's silence watches you the way a vault watches gold. Your name is printed on glossy reports, and you trust that ink, because it never trembles the way your hands do when headlines turn sharp. Outside, flags snap in cold wind, and you call it noise, though each snap feels like a bill coming due in a language you can't speak. You pour coffee beside windows, rehearsing calm phrases, while distant ports darken and cranes stand still like dead birds on metal legs. You tell the room growth will return, like spring, but your voice lands heavy, as if the words are wet coats hung on a single hook. Behind polite nods, traders sharpen smiles, and you sense their hunger, the way wolves sense a limping deer before the first chase begins. You flip to a chart and call it a horizon, yet it looks like a fence, and you wonder who you promised freedom to and why. A new tariff arrives like a sealed letter, and you feel your stomach drop because you recognize the handwriting as your own fear. You say temporary, but the word cracks, and the room hears it the way glass hears a stone before it is thrown. At night, you dream of numbers crawling under your door, thin as insects, filling the corners until the air itself becomes a ledger. In the morning, cameras wait, and you put on certainty like a tie, cinching it tighter until your breathing becomes measured lies. Leaders call for reassurance, and you offer it carefully like bandages, noticing each strip sticks less as the days grow hotter. Your forecasts march forward anyway, neat as soldiers, but you see their boots are hollow, and you fear the parade is only theatre. Someone whispers, "Trade war again," and you taste iron, because the word pulls old blood from places you never admit are wounded. You begin to borrow tomorrow's sunlight, spreading it thin across meetings, praying nobody notices the grey creeping in behind your eyes. Each revision is a quiet confession, and you hide it under footnotes, like burying a key so no one learns the door is already open. Markets twitch like a sleeping animal, and you realize your voice has become a lullaby that cannot stop the teeth from growing. Debt stands behind you like a tall shadow, and when you turn, it matches your posture perfectly, as if it has learned your walk. You speak of resilience, yet the syllables feel rented, and you feel the rent rising, line by line, breath by breath, until you're out of air. When the applause comes, it sounds distant and thin, and you understand you are clapping too just to prove your hands are still yours. You wake before dawn, because silence has weight now, pressing your chest like an unopened letter you already know will ask for more. The city below hums obediently, and you mistake that sound for health, the way a fever mistakes heat for strength. Emails arrive in clusters, polite and brief, each one tightening the room as if invisible furniture is being moved closer. You promise calm again, tasting the word like chalk, knowing it was never meant to be swallowed this many times. Across oceans, factories dim their lights, and you imagine them as eyes closing, not in sleep, but in resignation. You tell yourself predictions are anchors, yet each one drags behind you, snagging on rocks you refuse to name. A leader laughs on a call, too loudly, and the sound tells you more than the words ever could. You draw a clean line forward, but your hand hesitates, sensing the paper is thinner where hope is written. Meetings blur into each other, rooms changing but faces staying the same, like mirrors rearranged to hide a crack. You start measuring days by revisions, each smaller than the last, like footsteps retreating down a long hallway. Confidence becomes performance, and you feel the stage tilt, though the audience pretends not to notice. Somewhere, a port reopens briefly, and you cling to it, the way drowning men cling to floating wood. You repeat the story louder, as if volume can seal leaks that are already soaking the floor. At lunch, you watch cutlery shake in your hand, and you wonder when the tremor became part of you. Advisors circle gently, offering reassurance like sedatives, careful not to wake the patient you've become. You begin to fear pauses, because silence now feels like judgment, heavy and final. Every promise sounds borrowed, and you sense the lender waiting just outside the door. You glance at the calendar and feel time thinning, stretched tight like skin over bone. The word growth echoes back to you hollow, as if shouted into an empty well. That night, you sleep sitting up, afraid lying down might look too much like surrender. Morning briefings begin to feel like confessions, and you choose each word slowly, aware that silence now speaks louder than any promise. You watch colleagues nod in rhythm, and you wonder if agreement has become habit rather than belief. Headlines scroll past like warning lights, but you keep your gaze steady, trained to ignore alarms until smoke is undeniable. You describe progress as a path forward, though underfoot the ground feels softer, as if packed earth is turning to sand. Phone calls stretch longer, filled with pauses where trust used to live, and you learn how heavy a pause can be. You reassure partners gently, like calming a horse that smells fire long before flames appear. Each forecast revision tightens your chest, because shrinking margins feel like walls closing inward. You notice smiles fading faster now, disappearing the moment cameras turn away. The word confidence circles the room, repeated until it sounds borrowed and thin. At night, you replay conversations, hearing what was not said, and those omissions echo louder than words. You tell yourself the structure still stands, even as hairline cracks map themselves across your thoughts. A rumor moves through markets like a cold draft, unseen but enough to make everyone reach for coats. You try to steady the tone, lowering your voice, hoping calm can be contagious. Instead, unease spreads quietly, like ink bleeding through paper you insisted was thick enough. You begin measuring success by survival, a private adjustment you never admit aloud. Time accelerates, meetings stacking like fallen dominoes, each one pushing the next. You feel watched by expectations you helped create, now waiting patiently for you to fail them. Debt stops being a concept and becomes a presence, sitting in chairs you thought were empty. You smile for the room again, feeling the muscles ache, wondering when effort replaced belief. When you leave, the lights stay on behind you, burning steadily, as if someone expects you to return and explain everything. You notice how forecasts now arrive already tired, as if the paper itself knows it will be asked to carry more than it can hold. Morning light feels colder, and you blame the weather, not the narrowing space where certainty used to sit. Conversations shorten, trimmed of optimism, leaving only careful phrasing and guarded breaths. You speak of balance, yet every word tilts, betraying how uneven the floor has become beneath your feet. A distant dispute flares again, and you feel it here, like a pulled thread tightening around your ribs. You remind yourself control is an illusion, though you still reach for it out of habit. The room smells faintly of stress and coffee, a scent you associate now with waiting for bad news. You revise timelines quietly, shaving days into hours, hoping nobody notices the smaller horizon. Assurance becomes repetition, and repetition becomes noise, dulling even your own ears. You watch markets blink red, then calm, then blink again, like an eye struggling to stay open. Every nod from across the table feels heavier, weighted with expectation you no longer trust. You begin to sense that belief has shifted, no longer centered on you, but orbiting something colder. Calls end without warmth now, lines going dead before courtesy can catch up. You rehearse optimism alone, pacing corridors that echo too clearly. At times, you envy silence, because it no longer asks you to explain yourself. Debt presses closer, not loud or violent, but patient, certain you will acknowledge it eventually. You wonder when prediction turned into pleading, and how few noticed the change. The future feels thinner each day, stretched, translucent, showing outlines you refuse to name. You steady your voice again, telling yourself steadiness is still something you can give. When night falls, the city glows below, and you feel watched by millions who believe you know what comes next. You realize optimism now requires effort, like lifting a weight that grows heavier each time you pretend it hasn't changed. The room listens differently, no longer leaning forward, but sitting back, arms crossed in quiet appraisal. You trace familiar arguments, noticing how often they circle back without advancing. A small concession slips into your language, barely audible, yet it lands with a sound like something breaking. You feel the past tug at you, earlier promises resurfacing like ghosts asking to be recognized. Each briefing compresses the future into fewer sentences, thinning what once felt expansive. You pause mid-sentence more often now, testing whether silence can still hold attention. Outside, traffic flows steadily, and you envy its indifference to what you carry inside. Doubt settles into routine, becoming another item on the agenda you never distribute. You notice how easily reassurance slips into apology and how rarely anyone objects. The narrative tightens, edges drawn inward, leaving less room to maneuver without tearing it. You feel watched not by critics, but by those who once trusted you completely. A question goes unanswered, lingering in the room like smoke that refuses to clear. You sense that time is no longer an ally, but a creditor, marking days with quiet precision. Confidence becomes maintenance, something you service carefully to prevent sudden failure. You hear your own voice from recordings and barely recognize the steadiness it performs. Plans begin to feel conditional, spoken as if they might dissolve the moment they're touched. You hold the room together through habit, not conviction, and you know the difference matters. When you conclude, relief flickers briefly, then fades, replaced by the weight of what follows. Alone again, you sit with the silence, realizing it has learned your name. You begin to ration certainty, offering it in smaller portions, careful not to promise what your own hands no longer feel. The language you use grows softer, padded, as if sharp words might cut something already bleeding. You notice how quickly rooms empty now, conversations ending before reassurance fully forms. A familiar phrase slips past your lips and sounds foreign, like a name you no longer answer to. You feel pressure from below, not sudden, but constant, the way water tests a dam without resting. Each agreement comes with silence attached, a pause that weighs more than refusal ever did. You sense patience thinning, stretched across calendars and meetings like worn fabric. Your gestures become economical, conserving energy for moments that may never arrive. Outside your window, the world keeps trading places, partners, loyalties, as if practicing life without you. You begin to speak slower, hoping time might slow with you. The future no longer argues back. It simply waits, unblinking. You watch confidence drain from the room, leaving behind politeness where belief once lived. Questions shift in tone, no longer curious, but cautious, as if touching something unstable. You carry yesterday's optimism like an old document, careful not to tear its fragile edges. Sleep becomes shallow, interrupted by the sense that something is counting while you rest. You realize credibility is not lost loudly, but through countless quiet concessions. When you speak of recovery, the word feels distant, like a place you've only seen on maps. You brace yourself before each appearance, the way swimmers inhale before cold water. The applause fades faster now, leaving you exposed in the silence it once filled. You walk away again, aware that each step forward feels more like delay than progress. You sense the audience shrinking, not in number, but in faith, each face measuring you more than listening. Your words travel slower now, as if moving through thick air that resists every claim. You notice how often you lean on precedent, the past becoming a crutch you pretend is strategy. A familiar assurance leaves your mouth and falls flat, unable to stand on its own. You watch trust recede quietly, like water pulling back before revealing bare rock. Meetings begin with courtesy and end with calculation. Smiles replaced by careful glances. You find yourself explaining tone instead of substance. Sensing substance has grown fragile. The room feels colder, though thermostats insist nothing has changed. You begin to anticipate doubt before it's spoken, answering questions no one asks aloud. Your posture stiffens, holding authority in place through effort alone. Outside, alliances shift like shadows at dusk, stretching away from where you stand. You realize persuasion now costs more than it once did, paid in concessions you don't announce. A pause follows your statements long enough to hear pens stop moving. You feel time leaning forward, impatient, tapping its foot beside the door. The story you tell grows narrower, trimmed to avoid edges that might cut. You hear respect turning formal, polished, smooth to hide the loss beneath. Each appearance feels heavier, the air thick with expectation you cannot shed. You wonder if certainty ever belonged to you, or if it was only borrowed confidence. When questions end, relief mixes with dread, because silence now feels like verdict. You leave knowing belief has thinned again, and you are running out of space to stand. You feel the ground narrow beneath your feet, as if the floor itself is deciding how much weight it will still support. The assurances you offer now sound ceremonial, spoken because tradition demands them, not because they persuade. Faces across the room soften into politeness, a gentler mask than skepticism, but far more final. You notice how often eyes drift away while you speak, already calculating alternatives. The language of commitment fades, replaced by phrases that keep doors open without stepping through them. You sense dependence tightening, not on you, but around you, like ropes pulling in opposite directions. Each question feels rehearsed, careful not to wound, yet sharp enough to test where you bleed. You answer slowly, aware speed once implied confidence you can no longer afford. Outside, weather shifts abruptly and you envy its honesty. You hear your role described as steady, and understand steadiness has replaced trust. The room's patience thins, stretched by delays that no longer feel temporary. You catch yourself choosing words for safety, not clarity. A promise is deferred again, placed gently into the future like something already broken. You feel the cost of persuasion rise, paid quietly in flexibility you never recover. Your presence still commands attention, but it no longer commands belief. You sense the story slipping from your hands, pages turning without your consent. When you pause, no one interrupts, and the silence feels rehearsed too. You begin to suspect the ending is known, even if it is never spoken aloud. Relief no longer comes when meetings end, only the fatigue of postponement. You leave with the sense that collapse is no longer sudden, but scheduled. You wake with the sense that decisions are being made elsewhere, quietly, without needing your approval anymore. The morning brief feels ceremonial. A ritual performed after belief has already left the room. You speak carefully, knowing every sentence is now weighed for exit routes, not reassurance. Faces remain attentive, yet their stillness suggests preparation, not agreement. You realize your role has shifted from guide to reference, consulted but no longer followed. The language around you grows conditional, built on if and until, never when. You offer alignment and receive patience in return, thin and temporary. A familiar partnership pauses, not ending, just waiting long enough to make the distance permanent. You feel dependence reverse, others no longer leaning but bracing in case you fall. The story you once carried now carries you, dragging your voice behind its momentum. You notice decisions announced, not discussed, framed as inevitabilities. Your assurances land softly, absorbed without echo, like sound in heavy curtains. Time feels managed now, scheduled around outcomes you are no longer shaping. You sense relief in others when meetings shorten, as if endurance itself has become costly. You begin preparing explanations instead of futures, careful to sound composed. The word transition appears, polite and bloodless, replacing harsher truth. You feel yourself receding, present in name, absent in influence. Silence greets your pauses with ease, no longer anxious to be filled. When you stand to leave, no one rushes to stop you. You understand then that collapse is not falling, but being quietly set aside. You arrive knowing this is closure without ceremony, an ending disguised as another routine appearance. The room greets you politely, already organized around outcomes that no longer require your guidance. You speak last, not by design, but because there is nothing left to interrupt. Your words are acknowledged, noted, and carefully placed aside. You sense relief in the room, not cruelty, just efficiency returning. The future moves forward without resistance, smooth because it has already chosen. You realize authority has weight only when others are willing to carry it with you. Your forecasts rest neatly archived, preserved more as record than direction. You remember when numbers felt alive, responsive to belief and urgency. Now they feel still, like photographs of moments that no longer change. You stand quietly, aware no final judgment will be spoken. Collapse, you learn, prefers silence over spectacle. Outside, the world adjusts quickly, markets breathing as if unburdened. You are thanked for stability, a word that means endurance, not trust. You nod, accepting the language chosen for your exit. As you leave, no one follows and no one watches. Your role dissolves gently, without resistance, without rescue. You understand now that prediction failed not by error, but by dependence. Growth continued elsewhere, beyond the frame you are asked to hold. You step aside, and the system closes quietly, intact, and already moving on.